there's a false um, projection of excellence being not African. So when people either come over here or interact with others, they try to show you that look, we know we're Western enough. But that what that does is it robs you of your very identity, and you see people you're stuck in a place where you're not you're no longer African enough, for your own history and background, but you will never be Western
Never.
enough.
Yeah.
You would never, so trying, making a conscious effort to go back to remember where you come from, to learning your stories, to learning, the why of your of your people's worldview will help you, one, build that confidence, to say, look, this is who I am. But two, once you know who you are, once you understand who you are, it is then impossible for someone else to foist an identity on you. But even more important is that once you understand who you are, you begin to raise the next generation, to take back their identity. And once they can take back their identity, then they grow up as unique individuals in a in a world that is not shaped by a certain or by just one ideology.
Ndukwe, my brother, welcome to Empathy Led.
Thanks, man. Thanks, Junior, for having me here. It's been quite a while that we spoke, but thanks for having me on the show.
Of course, I'm always excited and looking forward to this conversation, but I'm especially excited here today to have you on the show and to chop up a little bit about the world, your work, empathy, and the motherland, because I'm sure inevitably there will be a lot about the motherland that is covered in this
Oh,
conversation.
definitely, especially now. Nigeria just had its presidential elections on Saturday, and I'm sure every Nigerian you come across right now is at their most tense, because we don't know what's going to happen. And but yeah, I'm sure we'll get to that, sometime during the course of our conversation.
Yeah. So I figure a good place for us to start is for you to paint a picture for how growing up in Nigeria and in Africa in general has influenced and shaped your worldview.
Oh yeah, well, thanks. I grew up in Nigeria, in the southeast of Nigeria, in a place called Aba. Aba, a very, very interesting city. It's Aba is one of those places where you not only learn about life from your immediate family, you also learn from the streets. So it's one of those places that really wisens you up. But it was quite interesting. Um, after secondary or primary school, I went to a different part of for a while. Went to a school in Benin, which is in the south region. Then went to oh no, I went to Lagos first, then Benin, then Port Harcourt, and then for university came back to Abia State. Aba is in Abia State. And after that, there's this thing called the National Youth Service in Nigeria, which is a 1 year paramilitary service that you
Wow.
have to do. The aim basically is to help foster greater integration amongst Nigerians, because if you know anything about Nigeria, we're a nation of now over 200 million people, which means we have a lot of ethnic composition within the country, a lot of languages. Is like Nigeria on a normal day is many nations in one geographical space.
Yeah.
So what the NYSC was designed to do was to get people like me, for instance, who grew up in the East, to go have their service year, as we call it, in far places like the North, and vice versa. And so I went to a place called Yobe State, Potiskum, to be precise. And that is where I served in Yobe State. And after that, went to Lagos to work in advertising. But the thing about, I mean, why I paint this picture is that it helped shape your worldview, traveling, meeting, different people from even though it's one country, but
Mhm.
every society, every ethnic group is quite significantly different from the other. And even within the same ethnic group, you have, the different villages, you have the different clans, and by traveling, by going to, different places, you get to understand people's worldview and get to allow, if you're open enough, let it also influence your worldview, because you suddenly start to realize that everything mustn't be through the lenses you've always had, the lens you've always have had growing up.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, for me, everything you just said about, I call it uh, moving outside of your world boundaries, right? And
Mm.
and being exposed and experiencing different versions of reality, and
Yep,
recognizing that there are other versions out there that are different than yours, but that are just as valid as yours. And I think,
definitely.
yeah, it completely reshape your worldview and slowly and slowly pushes the boundary and the shape of that worldview, because you can no longer go on with your life without accounting for those other versions that you've experienced. But one of the most difficult
Mm.
things I've found is being able to capture into words the essence of uh, the African culture, so that I can try to
Mm.
pass on that experience and open other people's worldview that I encounter, some that are curious and some that are ignorant. And I know you have a better way with words than I do. So how do you accomplish this very, very difficult feat to capture and put into words the essence of this thing that we understand intuitively, having been part of it, but can be difficult
Mm.
to translate into words?
Uh, it's quite. It's not the easiest thing.
No, at all.
It's not the
So hard.
it's not the easiest thing, because I mean, when you're talking to people from, either Nigeria or Africa, because and that these people have, even if variations of your worldview, it's
Mhm.
easier to pass across certain ideas to them, knowing that they will understand it, or have, understand the version of it.
Yeah,
But when it comes to, talking to people who grew up here, who, even if they're of African descent, but who grew up here and whose worldviews have been shaped by a different culture, you then need to find ways of substituting, feelings or understanding, just to pass across a certain idea. And unfortunately, for the most part, things get lost in translation.
of course.
So I think what then happens is, again, it's that, like you said, expanding, the boundaries of your world. You get to start learning about these people, and then substituting things in this culture, that can best describe the the message you're trying to pass across. So you have to break down again, is a different process or a different journey, breaking down all you've learned so that you can learn a new way, and then look for the common grounds between.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I know central to your work as an adman, as a creative director, as a poet, as an artist, is making sure that we are telling real, authentic African stories.
Mm.
One, why is that important? So important to you, and what is it that you want people to understand?
As Africans, we've been, and especially Africans that come here over time, one, uh, the influence of colonialism on the continent can't be overlooked. So you have people who, for a very long time, aim to, an aspiration of what they understand as being better than where they come from.
Mm,
So there's a false, um, projection of excellence being not African. So when people either come over here or interact with others, they try to show you that, look, we know we're Western enough.
mm,
But That what that does is it robs you of your very identity, and you see people, you're stuck in a place where you're not you're no longer African enough, for
Mhm.
your own history and background, but you will never be Western
Never.
enough.
Yeah.
You would never, so trying, making a conscious effort to go back, to remember where you come from, to learning your stories, to learning, you know, the why of your of your people's worldview will help you, one, build that confidence, to say, look, this is who I am. But two, once you know who you are, once you understand who you are, it is then impossible for someone else to foist an identity on you.
Mm.
But even more important is that once you understand who you are, you begin to raise the next generation, to take back their identity. And once they can take back their identity, then they grow up as unique individuals you know in a world that is not shaped by a certain, or by just one ideology.
Oh, I love that so much, man, because I think, uh, of course, in this segment, we are speaking particularly about African people that migrate into different places. But I think this is a universal story of immigrants, right?
Mhm.
This idea that in an effort to be accepted by your by your host culture, you tend to move so far away from your own,
Yeah.
and then what inevitably happens is that you get got stranded somewhere in the middle, where you are
True.
never fully accepted in your host culture the way you thought all your efforts would be rewarded. And in the
Mm.
process of belonging so deeply and so fully, you have lost touch with the mothership.
Yep.
And it can be quite a difficult existential experience for
Oh,
immigrants,
yes.
and we see it all the time, and we have to be mindful and stand guard of those things, because from time to time it can creep back in even when you have successfully transcended it.
True.
Yeah.
True. And it just comes in little things like, your name, just even knowing how to pronounce it, your food, the food you eat, your dressing, yeah, just understanding even why, always making sure you go back home at certain times, never get lost in the glory of the host nation. Yes, they're nice things, they're new experiences, but the more you go down into that rabbit hole,
Yeah.
the farther away you are from where you started,
Yeah.
and that can be a dangerous thing.
It can be a dangerous thing. I mean, and I want to touch back on something you even said earlier about this idea that once you understand yourself better and more deeply and more fully, you are in a position to raise the next generation of young people who may struggle with that same sense of self and sense of identity.
Mm.
But I want to add that I also think that is the pathway for you to form deeper, more authentic connections with others. Because
Mm.
in this caricature of person you you are creating in an effort to fit in, you are not building a real, authentic relationship, because the
Mhm.
person is not in a relationship with who you are. Is the person is in relationship with the projection of who you wish you could be,
Yeah.
and in that there is no real connection. So even your ability to connect with other people, your ability to empathize with other people, to see and recognize your humanity in them, you
Mm.
first have to develop and spend time to heighten your self of awareness and understanding of self.
Oh, definitely, definitely, and and just understand that nothing. It's almost like an education of a lot of things you've heard, or you learned growing up, and a re-education about the whys.
Mm.
Why do my people do this way? Why? Then you can make you can be in the right place to make a decision, an informed decision about what is right, or what you feel is right, and what you feel is wrong. And interesting thing is when you try to emulate, suppress yourself, so that you can be a new version of what you think others want to see, you you forget that these other people have taken time over time to perfect who they are now,
Mm,
and it's even still changing.
yeah.
But you're trying to make a leap from not fully accepting who you are to trying to fit into who is being projected now, without taking the necessary steps of even just understanding yourself. So it's a recipe for disaster.
It
You're still
is.
going to fail.
It is. We have this parallel about what we are talking about
Mm,
onto brands at the agency.
mm,
And the analogy we use is that there are two types of brands. There are window brands and there are mirror brands. So a
mm,
mirror brand reflects back to society what it thinks society expects from them, even if it's
mm,
not exactly who they are at their core. And we saw many, many, many mirror brands in 2020 during COVID, the murder of
mhm,
George Floyd and the uprising, right? Brands that all of a sudden made all these promises about the cultural reforms and the militantism, right? That never really came to fruition because they
mm,
were simply reflecting back to society what they thought society expected from them at the moment. And then
mm,
you have window brands. Window brands allow you to see what's in the inside. What you see is a reflection of who they are at their core and an expression of their DNA. So what we
mm,
encourage our companies to do, the clients that we work with, is to reconnect with that core and to be in touch with the things that are truly authentic to who they
mm.
are, with the understanding that, to your point, those things can evolve to respond and to respond to the ever evolving society, right?
Mm.
It's not that you are reflecting back to society, but there is a genuine fundamental shift in the way you choose to be as a
Mhm.
society, as a company, so that you can continue to serve the people that you seek to serve where they are and how they want to be, because society is evolving, right? And I
Oh,
see a
definitely,
beautiful
definitely.
parallel. Yeah.
Hmm. Oh, yeah, definitely. Because going back to 2020, COVID and the murder of George Floyd, I mean, it was all about self congratulation, wasn't it? Oh, look at us, we've done this. Oh, look at us, especially when you've done something seemingly creative. Now people are going to clap for you. But question is, have you really evolved? Have you truly
Mhm.
evolved? 1 year later, 6 months after in Adlan in the UK, for instance, yeah, a lot of agencies made pledges. Look, we're going to be more diverse. We're going to show diversity and inclusivity. 6 months later, everyone chucked that out of the window because it was never really who they were.
Yeah.
1 year later, they're not. So yeah, even if they get a token diverse person and put on their team, they don't have any interactions with the wider diverse community. So even that new diverse hire comes in trying to fit into the thinking that would let them communicate to a certain demographic that has always been there.
Yeah.
So um it's virtue signaling, and
It
when brands
is.
do that, ultimately they're going to lose. And I don't really buy this argument, because people try to say to brands, oh, you should be more empathy, show more empathy, you should do this because ultimately it's a good business decision you're going to make. No, 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 no. you know Chuck that in the bin. You're either doing the right thing because it's the right thing,
Mm.
or don't do it at all. But when someone has to show you a graph or show you projections that doing the right thing means more money in the bank for you, then you're not doing the right thing. You're just making a business decision.
Yeah.
And it's worse that you kept quiet than you try to use a sad situation for your gain.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think that's the reason there's this massive debate right now about the effectiveness of purpose driven ads versus the other type of ad, and everyone is looking at it through the lens of making a business case for it.
Yeah.
And for me, to your point, like the companies and the brands that are truly purpose driven, like just do it by virtue of who they are and
Yeah.
why they exist as a company. And any rewards and benefits they gain from it is an outcome of this quest and this mission and this purpose that they are on.
Yeah.
And for many of them, there's almost not even need to project that externally. It just
Mhm.
shapes and drives and defines the choices, the decisions, the habits and the behaviors that people have within the company. And it's just reflected in all the various ways they get to show up as a company, as opposed to the ones that are, thinking that, new research and data shows that purpose driven brand campaigns drive more revenue and da 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 da. And I think the framework fundamentally is flawed, and therefore anything that ensues is cannot be positive. So I know you are a creative director, someone who's very passionate about the conversation that we are having right now.
Mhm.
So how do you, within your sphere of influence, make sure to protect yourself, your agency, and the clients that you work with from the kind of lack of judgment or mistakes that we've just discussed?
Yeah, well, right now as a copy director for World Remit,
Okay.
uh, which interestingly deals with a lot of the migrant community.
Mm-hmm.
The first thing I do is to make sure that we do not speak from a point of view of this is what we're doing. No, we speak from a point of view of first understanding the community we're talking to, and speak in their voice, so that we can't say try and understand us. No, we will have to try and understand you. So is that seeking authenticity in understanding your target audience? If brands went out of their way to get more understanding about their target audience, not just their buying behaviors, because I think that's just really cynical. It's not just their media habits, but really understanding why. What's the why behind, the what. So if someone is viewing a certain channel, for instance, and is showing certain contents from certain communities, is it so? Don't just stop at, what, maybe we should put an ad, on that channel because there are going to be a lot of eyeballs. But why do they watch that? Are they trying to communicate, to connect with that community? So um, why can't you help them connect with that community even where you are? That is in deeper, more meaningful, and even though I hate the word, more purposeful approach to things. So for me, my approach is, first of all, understand who you're talking to. And I know that sounds like, oh, of course, but no, it's to understand the why behind the what, and then ask yourself, how can I, in understanding these people, show them, that respect, that appreciation, that empathy, by showing some, even if it's remotest interest in what they do, but at least get to know who you, not just to know their age and where they live and what they now get to know the why.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think it's becoming more and more obvious that in our interconnected world, demographic markers are no longer adequate boxes to fit people in, right?
Yeah.
Because now people have different interests and different beliefs and different values. So I know you are a poet, you are a wordsman. How did you how did poetry come about to be in your life? When did you discover that you had this talent and this way with words?
Yeah, I'll say even now I'm still learning my way around words, But to answer your question, when I was growing up, there were a lot of books in the house, and a lot of them were, you know, well, some of them were poetry books, and I just dove into them because I sort of like, I loved, the way they painted pictures with
Ah,
words, and it just fascinated me. And being one who daydreams a lot, reading these books helped, just my mind go places. And The thing with what you enjoy is that at some point you start trying, you start emulating. So the more I read these books, the more I started writing, first in the style of some of my favorite poets, but then eventually you just find that you start to find your voice.
Yeah.
You're no longer trying to emulate someone. You're trying to say what you feel, and how you feel. So um it just grew into that. Got on stages, performed, open mics and all that. In 2017, had produced my first album, released my first spoken word album.
Wow.
But the thing is that between 2017 and 2019, when I released my second album, you can also hear that there was a shift, in just worldviews as well, because I also kept trying to find my voice, and also trying to find out why certain subjects were of interest to me, and the why behind what I did. So I think in 2019, it was my 2019 album titled Machuku was a better reflection of where I've been trying to get to all along, and
Mm.
what that has done. It birthed, a lot of other projects. Right now, like you're well aware, I'm shooting a short film, that's based on Igbo mythology. But again, it's from that storytelling basis that this morphed into that. So started out, just again by just trying to copy other people, learn, and that's not a bad thing. But eventually, the more you try your hands at it, the more you get to know who you are, and the more you start to dig deeper and find yourself.
Yeah, yeah. I'm glad you mentioned the short film you're working on. I can't remember it. I think it's like Ada Ani.
Yes, Adani. Yeah.
There we go. So could you tell our audience a little bit more about the film, and the intention behind it?
Right. Thanks. So like I mentioned, Adani came out of first finding my voice on my 2019 album Wachuku, in which I talked about my Igbo identity, home, just what it meant to be you know African in a changing world. And then I got deeper into thinking about it, and I realized that a lot of the stories we enjoy today are just retelling of Western cultural philosophies, and that is a good thing because it has helped create a culture for this society. But when it comes to our people, the reference point is always that, because for some weird reason we've also always seen to think of our stories, our histories, our philosophies as evil, as devilish, and as not to be touched. But when you compare some of the things in our cultures with what we see, again, I'll give you an example. Thor is $1 million franchise in the West, but Amadioha, for lack of a better word, the Igbo version of Thor is, hidden somewhere, never to be touched, because he's such an evil person.
Yeah,
But the same people who think that enjoy Thor,
yeah,
and it doesn't make sense. So what I'm doing with Adani is to explore some of these mythology, in artistic ways, so that we can start exploring our identity, our culture, start having those conversations, and reconnect with where we come from. But on a different level, it's also to help foster communication, because if I come at you and I say, "Oh, look at this, this Amajoha," and you go like, "Oh, hey, hang on, we have that as Thor," and someone else says, "Oh, we have that, as this other person," then suddenly you start to realize that we have we've been looking at this one phenomenon from different perspectives. So there's really, at the base, fundamentally, not much difference between us.
yeah.
Then we can start having conversations and so, "Oh, what about this? How do you do this?" And I believe telling your own stories, will also help others to get a better appreciation of who you are, and that fosters unity at the end.
Yeah, absolutely. So in that context, then, how do you feel about Black Panthers and the franchise, and how successfully or unsuccessfully, I don't know, are they delivering on this mission?
Yep. So I think interesting. I was having this conversation yesterday with someone else, and I immensely enjoyed Black Panther, even though I enjoyed Black Panther 1, but I did 2. But that's a different conversation altogether. But I think the idea of seeing an empowered African society does something to the psyche, and also being able, seeing the Wakandan symbols and recognizing that they were built on Nsibidi. Nsibidi is, an Igbo system of writing.
Okay.
And now there's a myth that people will say, "Oh, Africa, sub-Saharan Africans didn't have a system of writing. All we've learned, we just didn't write or archive stuff." That is rubbish. We have scripts that show that we did have ways of writing and communicating, and even putting down court judgments. But seeing CBD on the big screen and realizing, wow, this is how there's a possibility for our stories to go global. I think Black Panther, whatever you think of the franchise, needs to be applauded for for creating a version of Africa in a modern world that can be.
Yeah. I mean, I think about Black Panthers and the impact it's had, and especially here in the US, the impact it's had on African American, for example, and their willingness and interest and curiosity to reconnect with their roots. I think about the impact that Afrobeat is having across the world, and I cannot help but really remind myself that people like you, the artists, the poets, are arguably more important and more influential than the lawmakers in this mission of creating a little bit more equity and inclusion around the world, right? So how do you understand your responsibility within that context?
I agree with you, not because I'm a poet or now a filmmaker, but because I've come to understand just the importance of telling stories.
Yeah.
Stories are like the foundation upon which societies stand. And the story of yourself that you tell to the world is that which they will hold on to. So when you see Afrobeat, for instance, there was a time I remember back in the 90s when everyone wanted to sound so American, in their music. And then a few people, said to themselves, you know what, let's just hold on to what is ours. It started as as them having a niche audience, but then suddenly everyone, is suddenly seeing that, look, this is huge. This sound is different.
Yeah.
This sound can go mainstream. But what it does again is it breaks down those barriers between communities, because now you go to very, very white places, for instance, and they're pumping Afro music on the radio, and you're like, blimey, what on earth is going on here? And it puts a sense of pride in you. Now imagine turning on the telly one day and you're seeing authentic stories from African mythology. Now we have the Woman King as well, telling a story. But there are a lot more stories of that in Africa. If you go to good Lord, the Benin Empire in Nigeria, it has such beautiful stories. You have stories of Aroha. You have the story of the Ogisos. You have story of of the Obas, and how the transition from Ogisos to Obas came about. You have all these stories, and they're just lying. They're not being told.
Yeah.
So imagine, and when people say the sky is big for for everyone, it literally is, because you can you can take these stories and start to change policies. And most times you don't know so much about it. I mean, give you an example. The American relationship with guns. This was, apart from, having the, gun owning enshrined in the constitution, you have movies that sort of like just glorified, the good guys going in and taking down bad guys, with, whether I'm not talking about whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, but
Yeah.
the thing is, you saw a movie and you go like, yeah, it's an American, they have a gun, of course.
Yeah.
You understand? Or when you think of French and romance, this is, it has been told through their story. So there's a point in which your stories can begin to shape your policies, and they don't even need to be they don't need to be carefully mapped out. They
Yeah.
just happen.
Yeah. I mean, I think there is something about just stories and those art forms that really seep through your consciousness
Yeah.
and influence and reshape your worldviews in ways that you are not even consciously aware of. And I
Mhm.
think in that is the real power of art and story and music and griots like you, because I think all of a sudden you have a new generation of people that will end up becoming the next entrepreneurs, the next
Mhm.
lawmakers, the next social workers, and the lens through which they look at the world, the reference points that they use are
Mhm.
completely different because they have been influenced and reshaped and rewired through these subtle doses in the music they
Mhm.
consumed, in the films that they watch, in what showed up on the television, in how fashion was influenced when they were growing up, and the way they see the world and the reference points that they use are just completely different.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
just means that they are building different kinds of businesses, they're doing advertising differently, they're different kind of lawmakers, different kinds of heads of states, and as a result of it our world is just a different place, and hopefully a more equitable, a fairer, more loving, kinder, more empathetic place, because those who are responsible for the institution that make up a society have those qualities within them.
Mhm. True.
Uh,
I mean, to that point, think of the biggest social media platform.
uh,
What makes it tick? It's not so much the technology, but it's the stories that are told on there and the communities that they create.
mhm.
So there are people that when they want to be in a certain mood, or they go to platform A. When they want to be in an argumentative mood, they go to platform B. When they just want to show off his platform, whatever. So these things are just tools, but at the end of the day, stories are being told.
Yeah,
So more important than the tool is the content,
yeah,
and more, and the most important, I would argue, recipe in that content is empathy, is understanding who you're talking to, having that understanding, having that respect for them. Then you're able to have a conversation, a communication. And once you do that, success knocks at the door.
yeah. So we are somehow the time flew by so quickly, coming close to the end of this
Yeah.
conversation. So I wanted to end with a question around what is then often missed about our shared humanity in the superficial markers that we have created for ourselves and within our society to try to relate to each other or connect with each other or create these uh, siloed community. Like, what are we missing about the common thread that stitches our existence as human beings together? What is often missed?
I think we try to impress too much.
Mm,
We're trying to show off how much we know, but the truth is we don't know as much as we think we do. And if we realize that we don't know as much as we think we do, and the best we can do for ourselves is just open ourselves to be wrong, a
mm,
lot of the times, then we can start having conversations that matter. But if you think it's my way or the highway, or I'm here to teach you stuff, you're always just going to miss. But be, know that you're wrong and that you can learn something, that will create a better conversation and a better outcome.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, and I couldn't think of a better way to end the
Mm.
conversation. Right, curiosity and humility are really the key ingredients
Yeah.
to creating a more empathetic, equitable, fairer place for
Mm.
everyone. And we already discussed in large and in long
Mhm.
the power and the impact that storytellers and poets and artists like you have
Mm.
on reshaping our society and our world. So, on behalf of all of us, I wanted to take a moment to thank you for your incredible contribution. Yeah,
And thank you for having me on here, man. The more we connect, the more we tell our stories, the better. We're all interconnected, aren't we? So let's tap into that connection. Let's tap into, that beehive, as it, or the honeycomb of our connection, as it were.
yeah.
So thank you for having me here.
Now, thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I'm sure
Mm.
we'll continue our conversation offline.
Definitely.
Yeah.